Waiting to buy a home? The Churchill Mortgage team says now is a great time to buy. Waiting could be a costly mistake because when rates drop, new home buyers will flood the market, driving up home prices. Go to churchillmortgage.com for your free analysis and see how home values can outpace rates to help you build wealth over time faster. This is a paid advertisement. NMLS ID 1591. NMLSconsumeraccess.org. Equal housing lender. 1749 Mallory Lane, Suite 100, Brentwood, Tennessee 37027.
My brother-in-law died suddenly, and now my sister and her kids have to sell their home. That's why I told my husband we could not put off getting life insurance any longer. An agent offered us a 10-year, $500,000 policy for nearly $50 a month. Then we called SelectQuote. SelectQuote found us identical coverage for only $19 a month, a savings of $369 a year.
Whether you need a $500,000 policy or a $5 million policy, SelectQuote could save you more than 50% on term life insurance.
For your free quote, go to SelectQuote.com. SelectQuote.com. That's SelectQuote.com.
SelectQuote. We shop. You save. Full details on example policies at SelectQuote.com/commercials.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi, flying solo. I'm going to be flying solo covering the Anthony Todt trial. The reason is, if you're a regular listener, you know that Fruit Loop has surgery a week from today. And right now, she's just trying to get everything in order. Doesn't have time right now to do 2 episodes a day, which doing the trial, we will have to, because we want to finish up those text messages between Lori and Zulema before she goes to surgery. So I'm going to cover this trial solo. It's expected to go into next week. So may as well get used to it now. You got me all to yourself. And sorry, it's not quite as fun without Fruit Loop around to bounce off of, but we're going to get through this because that's what we do. All right. Before I get started, I want to give a quick shout out to one of our sponsors, Too Cool T-Shirt Quilts. You can go to toocooltshirtquilts.com/pretty lies and alibis. Check them out. They'll know we sent you. They can take your T-shirts and make them into a quilt that is too cool. If you're new to the show, look behind me. These are just a couple of the quilt pillows that she made for me. And I have a big Clemson quilt with all T-shirts on there. You can use T-shirts, all kinds of stuff. Go check them out, please. They support us, and we are very grateful. All right. Day 2 of Anthony Todt. We're going to jump right in because it was kind of a long day, and there's a lot to cover. It is the most sad and bizarre case. One of the most bizarre I've ever covered. It's just very, it's so disturbing, guys. So we're going to jump in. The first witness of the day was Jennifer Snora, who is the deputy medical examiner, and she performed the autopsies on the victims. So there were some things that were common with all 4 of the victims, and I'm just going to throw those out there now so we're not being repetitive. The cause of death for all 4 was homicidal violence of unspecified means and Benadryl overdose for all 4 victims. The state of decomposition that the bodies were in, it left them with no blood to do toxicology. So they had to use samples from the liver, the brain, sometimes the chest fluid, if it was present, to test the toxicology. DNA was taken from all 4 victims and submitted into evidence. She was not able to rule out or confirm suffocation as a cause of death due to the state of decomposition. Normally with suffocation, you have redness in the eyes, the gums can be, or the inside of the mouth can be affected, but unfortunately they were just too decomposed for her to really determine if suffocation was a cause. So real quick, we're going to jump into Zoe's autopsy, and the medical examiner, and I just want to give a trigger warning before we start this episode, by the way. I forgot to do that at the beginning. We are dealing with the deaths of children in this trial, and it's always disturbing. I have decided not to cover a few things. You can go back and watch testimony on YouTube. Law and Crime has all those clips available. But we know they were murdered, and when we get to the part where they introduced the video evidence of Anthony giving essentially his confession, he gets a little graphic with stuff. I'm not going to put that on here, even though it's part of true crime. There's no need. we know the end result. So you can check that out for yourself if you're interested. So the medical examiner said the condition of Zoe's body was decomposed more so than the others. And the reasoning for that is in the photos of her body at the crime scene, she saw Zoe was swaddled in blankets, and she explained that that held in heat during decomposition and contributed to her being more decomposed than the others. At the time of autopsy, she was 3 foot 4 inches tall and weighed 30 pounds. Oh boy. There was no evidence of external injury to her body. She was the only one of the four that was not stabbed. They took a sample of bone marrow to conduct the DNA test, and they also took fingernail clippings, I believe in all four. So for Alex's autopsy, he was 5'1" and 88 pounds. She said the autopsies were challenging due to the state of decomposition. He had a single stab wound to the abdomen. Now, remember, the stab wounds were not fatal because there was no pooling of blood inside the boys, which means that the heart wasn't pumping and these injuries occurred post-mortem. Megan did have blood in her abdomen. She cleaned that wound and determined that no major organs were hit, and the stab wound was about 4.5 inches deep. So for Tyler's autopsy, he was 4'9" and 84 pounds. She had a hard time observing the wounds to his abdomen due to the decomposition. She said the knife did hit his large intestines, but the absence of blood helped her conclude that this was postmortem and that stab wound would not have been fatal. So moving on to Megan's autopsy, she was 5'3" and 103 pounds. She had 2 stab wounds to the abdomen, which did not hit any internal organs. She couldn't determine if the stab wounds were self-inflicted due to the path of being front to back and downward. The wound was 8 inches deep into the abdominal cavity, which is very deep. There was evidence of hemorrhage. So she was alive when those injuries occurred. Those wounds in itself would not have been fatal either. She was unable to obtain any fingerprints from any of the victims. So on cross-examination, you see the defense taking a little bit and running with it. And they did today. I mean, look, as trial followers, they're not our favorite people in the whole process. But I think given what they have to work with, they took the opportunity with this cross-exam and also with a couple more to to try to put some reasonable doubt in there. Not sure it'll work. But so on cross, the defense attorney asked, one of your sources was Detective Cole Miller. When you first talked to him, he said this was a case of suffocation or strangulation. Is that correct? And she said, he mentioned suffocation. I don't remember strangulation. So the defense says, let's go back to your deposition. Do you remember what you were told by Detective Miller? And she replied that the defendant supposedly asphyxiated or strangled the victims. And the defense asked, did he also tell you there was a suicide note or pact? And she said yes. Defense then asked, help us understand how Benadryl becomes toxic. And they said, look, normally it's a benign over-the-counter drug you use for allergies or sleep. But the medical examiner said, of course, if you take it at therapeutic levels, you'll be fine. If you take high doses, you can have issues with the heart, especially in children, because they're more easily affected by medication. The defense then asked, in your 4,500 autopsies you performed, have you worked Benadryl deaths? And she said she had maybe a dozen, and it's mainly in suicide cases. They don't see it a whole lot. So then they asked if she pursued suffocation as a cause of death, and she said she examined the bodies as best she could given the state of decomposition. Now, I thought this was an interesting question to ask. And the defense asked, did you do the Annalise test to see if saliva was found on a pillow or a spread that would indicate suffocation? And she said no. So then the defense asked, you've eliminated suffocation and strangulation as a cause of death. And she replied that she didn't rule it out, but she couldn't confirm either due to the state of the bodies. They talked about the patterns that stab wounds can leave. You can have a Y In other words, stab wounds can have a lip on them and go in a certain direction. And they asked if the Y shape of a knife wound indicates there was more force used, and also about the L shape of the knife wound. And she said, essentially, when you see an L shaped wound on a homicide victim, it means either the person doing the stabbing moves the knife or the person being stabbed moves their body. Neither of these were present on any of the victims. So they asked about the liver and brain giving toxicology evidence. They brought up that there was ethanol in Megan's brain, and that indicates maybe she was consuming alcohol prior to her death. Um, the medical examiner said she obviously must have consumed some alcohol. They do not know the quantity. And she was asked, you classified homicides, that means a human is involved, right? And she said that's violence inflicted by another person, clearly. And the defense asked, it doesn't necessarily mean it's premeditation or a weapon. And she said, well, it doesn't always prove intent. They asked if she could tell if the stab wounds to Megan's abdomen were self-inflicted, and she said she could not determine whether they were self-inflicted or if they were inflicted upon her by somebody. They asked if it was a suicide attempt. Is there anything about the wound that would show that? And she said, I would look and see if they could do it to themselves. And she gave the example of if somebody gets stabbed in the middle of the back, it would be really, really almost impossible for somebody to do that to themselves. She was stabbed in the abdomen. They also asked her if she saw any signs of trauma from a struggle, and she said no. They asked if she incised the lip tissue for injuries to the mouth, and she said none was found. If she had seen any, she would have investigated further. So Anthony Todt's attorney talks to him at the end of this cross for about a minute. It was quiet in the courtroom, and you think maybe he's telling him to ask something, but after the silence, the defense says that's all. So the state goes up for redirect, and they ask if she was able to tell a time or date of death based on the decomposition. And she said her best estimate would be at least a couple of weeks that they had been dead. And questioning about Megan's stab wounds, you indicated they occurred prior to death. Would they affect her ability to defend herself? Medical examiner said she did have some bleeding after, so it could have made her in pain and obviously not able to fully defend herself. Lord have mercy. It's like a rap. Y'all bear with me. It's been a crazy day. Can I just say, with the craziness of this trial yesterday and Lori Vallow being deemed competent, I totally forgot I had Bon Jovi tickets last night. Oh, man. I was so upset, y'all. All right, so the state asked, you talked about the Y or L shape of the wound based on movement. If the person was stabbed and couldn't move, could it mean there's no L or Y shaped? And she said, yes, that's accurate. What they were getting to there is if she was drugged with Benadryl, she might have been out of it enough to where she wouldn't have fought super hard. The next witness was Christopher Conklin, a DNA crime lab analyst. Look, guys, DNA is very complicated, and they're giving all these millionths, billionths chances. I'm going to sum it up real quick. They couldn't get a full profile on Zoe due to her decomposition. The green and black knife, it had blood on it. The handle had 3 donors, one being a male contributor. And the fingernail clippings from Zoe, they found no foreign DNA on the left hand. On the right, there was a gender marker indicating male DNA, but nothing that they could pull a profile from. So on cross exam, the defense asked the handle of the green blackened knife. You don't know if the package was contaminated. He said no. They asked if it was sealed, and the witness said the outside was sealed, but the inside was not. Then the defense asked, you got a DNA profile from the handle that showed mixed contributors, and he said at least 3 contributors. And then the defense asked the whole family were possibly contributors. Is that right? And he responds, yes. They then ask, is it more likely that Megan was holding the knife more so than Anthony? And she said it just means that she was a contributor. And then the defense asked, you don't know how that DNA was put on there? And the witness said no. So if if I am understanding what they were saying correctly, I believe the major contributor on that knife was Megan, more so than anybody else. But I kind of have a theory. If her stab wound was 8 inches deep, there is a good chance that during the violence, maybe that enabled some biological material to get on that handle. I don't know. So on redirect, the state asks regarding the knife handle, it doesn't tell you how long someone held the object. And he said that's correct. And then they ask, you didn't rule out anyone from being contributors just from touching the knife. And the witness said that was correct. So then the last thing that they ask on redirect is that DNA is transferred from different sources. It could be blood, saliva, skin. Did your analysis decipher where the DNA came from? And the witness said no. And that was the last question. Next, we move to Kathy Carswell, who's a toxicologist. And I have to say, I'm not really sure where the defense attorney was going with this. He was a little accusatory with her. He asked if she had any kind of a financial stake in the company she works for in the form of stocks. And she's like, no. Really weird. I don't know where. I mean, if he had any evidence of that, he surely would have produced it. And even if she did, I don't know why that would indicate she may fudge the results of this toxicology. So, essentially what she testified to is that all 4 victims had very, very high amounts of Benadryl in their system. She used a lot of numbers, a lot of fancy toxicology talk. And the defense also asked about the chain of custody on the samples. And she said she would need a chain of custody sheet to talk about that. And he says, you told us lots of numbers talking about these toxicology reports, but you can't tell me how it gets to the lab. And he also asked if they will do toxicology for defense attorneys. And she says, I don't handle that. So he asks about who signs for specimens and how they're shipped, asking if their computers have a bad day. And she said, well, we know if they're having a bad day. It was a really weird exchange with the defense attorney, not sure where he was going with that at all. The next witness was Dr. Adam Stern. He is a forensic pathologist for veterinary medicine. He performed the autopsy on Breezy. On the right side of the chest, there was a 1 centimeter hole indicating that the dog had been stabbed, although he really didn't say it. The condition of the dog was is so decomposed that it was really hard to move the dog without, the only way to say is the dog was falling apart. So then he asked if you see evidence of smothering in a canine, and he said you probably wouldn't see evidence of smothering in a canine. So on cross-exam, they say, it's hard to be certain what you're looking at sometimes. And how can you be sure you're right? And the vet said pathology isn't new, but applying that to crimes against animals is newer in the last 20 years.
Okay, round 2. Name something that's not boring.
A laundry? Ooh, a book club. Computer solitaire, huh?
Ah, sorry, we were looking for Chumba Casino. That's right. ChumbaCasino.com has over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Lucky Land Casino, asking people, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
Lucky? In line at the deli, I guess?
Aha, in my dentist's office. More than once, actually.
Do I have to say?
Yes, you do.
In the car before my kids' PTA meeting.
Really?
Yes.
Excuse me, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
I never win and tell.
Well, there you have it. You can get lucky anywhere, playing at LuckyLandSlots.com. Play for free right now. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
And they ask if the defect in the chest could be due to decomposition. At that point, the doctor says yes, it could be. So they really didn't establish a cause of death for Breezy, even though he did have the 1 centimeter puncture wound. The next witness was Dr. Bruce Goldberger. He does forensic toxicology and pathology and reviewed the reports on all the victims. He said the condition of their remains made it impossible to really tell if the amount of Benadryl in their system was fatal. He said that the amount that they did measure would have caused fatigue, being lethargic, sleepy. And for Alec, they can't determine if that was the cause of death. He did have Tylenol in his system, but a large dose essentially would cause nausea and vomiting. So he explained that the effects of overdose from something like Tylenol is not seen for a few days. And at that point, it would start to affect the liver. And that's how they would know. But at autopsy, Alec did not have that. Tyler also had it in his system, but at much lower levels. So even though he says he can't say for sure, the levels of Benadryl in their system, according to this man, are remarkable and significant. And he agrees with the medical examiner that Benadryl played a role because of the concentration that they were able to measure in their bodies. So on cross, they ask, what does remarkable mean? And he said, not incidental, and it has some importance. It's a finding of toxicity, not necessarily the cause of death, but a finding that can't be ignored. And they point out that people do die from large amounts of Benadryl. He said his point of view is that I have no way to say it was a cause of death. I can't say if it was or it wasn't. And I think maybe at some point the defense is going to pounce on that in their argument. On redirect, the state asked, is it likely Benadryl would have prevented them from defending themselves? And he said yes. And I think that's a really good point to drive home. I thought that was a really good way to end that testimony by the state. They had a long break at this point. They needed audio to be unredacted for the state to put on. This was the interview with Anthony at the police station shortly after he was released from the hospital with Cole Miller. Also, somebody was caught taking pictures of the jurors, and the judge addressed that. I think what happened is a wide shot came out when the jury was leaving, and that was somebody was filming, maybe for news media in there. And so the judge addressed that. I really like this judge. He just kind of sits back and lets the court take over. He's not overbearing, and he seems very fair. So the last part of testimony today was long. And again, I'm just not going to go into every single thing that this interview had in it for several reasons. One, some of it's just very graphic. And also, I just can't do the whole interview. We'd be here for 2 hours. So let's hit the important parts. When Detective Miller got on the stand, they asked to identify Anthony, and the state asked if he looked different. And he said, obviously, he's lost a lot of weight. So he interviewed Anthony on January 13th and the 15th. 13th is the day he was arrested. 15th, obviously, is the day he was released from the hospital. There was audio and video on this, which was nice to see. It makes it easier to do our job when we can see and stop and read lips if we need to. Anthony is seen in the white zip-up suit, and he's handcuffed the whole time, right in front of his, like this. They ask how he feels, and he says he feels sad and wishes he was with his family on the other side. The detective said he attended the autopsies the day before. Now, I'll note that for the most part, Anthony had no emotion. He was very matter of fact, telling his version of what happened. And the only time I saw him get emotional was when he talked about taking the children up to the master bedroom. Now, I think this is interesting to note. This is something I just found out today. In the jailhouse letter to his dad, I believe that was like 30 pages. Still haven't read it yet, but I've read parts. He told his dad that Megan did all this. He was outside sleeping in the van and got up around 4:30 and found all this. So just keep that in mind, especially our listeners that aren't super familiar with the ins and outs of what's happened since this case came into the media. So they asked for him to tell what happened from the beginning. And he said that Megan had been watching videos about the afterlife, and she got him to start watching. And the more they watched, he realized there's a higher level of consciousness. He said that Megan had been chronically ill for a while, and it had affected both of them. They talked to the boys about death and asked what would happen if mommy or daddy died, how it would make them feel. And according to Anthony, the boys said they would want to die with them. He said that him and Megan started talking about the alleged suicide pact around Thanksgiving, murder-suicide pact around Thanksgiving. But they started watching the videos together in about April, according to him. He said ultimately they decided to transition together. They didn't know how to do this because they're not violent people. So something came on TV about cough medicine, and Megan, according to him, Megan made a pudding pie with sleep ease. You can get those over the counter. I've seen them at Walmart and things like that. He said nothing happened when the kids ate that. So they started to research before Halloween and learned that Benadryl was the best way they thought to do this. They also thought about bleeding to death, so they decided to stab the kids and to use Benadryl. My gosh, I just don't get it. I don't get it, but it just makes me sick to have to even talk about this stuff. Anthony says that the kids were dead before Christmas, and the investigator said that family told him they spoke with Megan the day after Christmas. So they asked, was Megan alive the day after Christmas? And Anthony said she died the day after the boys did. He tells Anthony that the family looked at cell records and Megan told him the kids were sick the day after Christmas. He was insistent that they were dead before Christmas. He said the day the kids were murdered, they set an alarm for 11:30 p.m. and got up. And he said the kids were not routinely given medications. He doesn't remember if they had Benadryl that night. He said and then the investigator kind of alluded to the Benadryl, and he said they must have given them the cough medicine that night. So he goes through, and I'm not going to get into specifics. He goes through each child and how that was done, and whether or not it's true, it's these poor souls were murdered. And so he said that when all three children were murdered, he walked into the bedroom, and Megan said they had to finish this before the sun comes up. He did say that he called Tyler my Tyler. And just in watching this testimony or this confession video, if you'll call it, it seemed like when he talked about Tyler, that's when he had the most visible reaction. He would call him my Tyler. And he said he was the strongest and the quickest kid. So they wanted to make sure it was quick because if he escaped, it wouldn't help the situation and they wouldn't all be able to go to the afterlife together. The investigator asked if Tyler bled out and that there should be blood. And Anthony said they had a waterproof cover on that mattress. See, it doesn't make sense because the version of events that Anthony gives, the medical examiner has kind of disputed in that Tyler and Alec had no blood in their abdomen. So it's pretty much a given they were stabbed post-mortem. So they asked Anthony what Megan was doing at the time the kids were murdered, and he said she was outside the door doing meditations. The investigator said that all this had to be hard on him, and Anthony said that we love our kids and it was sad. He said it was around 5 a.m. at this point, and they talked about which one of them would go first. They decided they wanted the dog with them in the afterlife, so Anthony says he suffocated the dog. Investigators also asked about the stab wound on the dog, and Anthony said he didn't stab the dog. Megan said she wanted to go next. So he said he researched on Quora.com how to aim for the artery and other things. He did this before the children. He said he also used it for techniques on how to take your life and how to use the knife. So he said he was using his iPhone to research and his Surface tablet. Now, here's my question. I really, really hope, and I'm sure they did, get the information off of the Surface tablet, the internet search history for the phones, everything, because that would maybe show if, in fact, Megan was watching these videos. It would be very easy to debunk if she's not, or easy to confirm, although I really don't. I think this was him. His world was crashing. He was about to be arrested by the feds. People panic. And yeah. So he said that Megan started taking Tylenol PM and stabbed herself. And he asked if she hit the spot. They were aiming for the carotid or the artery in your abdomen. Forget the name of it. He said she laid there for 45 minutes, had a glass of wine, and asked if they had any Benadryl. And he said they had liquid. So according to him, she drank the whole bottle. So he kept checking on her and thought at one point she had passed. And then she asked for more Benadryl and drank that entire bottle. He said eventually she stabbed herself again. And he said he laid and held her and hours went by and he got up to check on the kids. When he came back, he said she was still awake and said, "This is taking too long and she wants it over now." So according to Anthony, she asked him to suffocate her. And he said, "I don't know if I can do that." And she said, "If you love me, you will. I want to be with my babies." According to him, she took more Benadryl and he came back in 15 minutes later and she said to get it done. They asked about how much of the Benadryl they had around the house. He said he thought they had 2 boxes of the sleeping medication, 2 boxes of Tylenol PM, and 2 big bottles of Benadryl. He said that Megan took a lot more than they thought it would take, and eventually he suffocated her with a pillow. But Megan said, okay, so here's the thing. Suicide pact, he's still alive. According to him, Megan asked him to wait a day or two to make sure everything was done. And so he said at that point, he started trying. He said he went to Publix, CVS, and Walgreens to get more Benadryl. He said he tried to hang himself. He tried for 2 weeks and nothing worked. Isn't that convenient? He said he read you could kill yourself with a pellet gun in the heart and the liver. He tried that. Nothing happened. He tried a zip tie around the neck. He said his neck was too big. And then he tried towels with pressure points. So then they kind of moved to the talking about carrying kids to the bedroom. He said he didn't want to drag Alec out of the ultimate respect for him. He gets emotional at this point and asks for a tissue and said he had nothing to hide, that he wasn't going to hide behind a lawyer. He was going to be honest. He admitted that he chickened out with the knife, and they asked why didn't he use a real gun to kill himself, because we know he bought one, I think December the 19th, right before he came back down to Florida. And he said he went to sleep for 2 days after taking a lot of Benadryl, said he slept in the bed with Megan. He said he used air purifiers up there, also used candles and sage smudges to allow for their spirits to pass on. Investigators asked if they opened Christmas gifts, and he said they were not alive for Christmas. He was very adamant about that. They asked if he left the house at any other point, and he said he went to McDonald's once or twice. He also went to Starbucks and left his phone there and went and got it back. They talked about when the investigator showed up at his house, and he said he thought he might be under surveillance that day. Now, this is interesting because at this point they call for a recess, and Anthony is really animated with his defense attorney, pointing to that screen, very animated conversation. We don't know what it was about. So when they come back from this break, he said that they did have a note that they wrote together, but it was printed after Megan died. Investigators now, this was interesting to a lot of people who have been following this for quite a while. Investigators said they found arsenic in the home, and Tony seemed shocked on this confession video and said he wished he had known because he would have used that to kill himself. But here's my thing. Megan had been chronically sick for a while. I'm curious, and I don't think they did because we haven't heard about it, testing hair, because that is the best way to find out if somebody has been slowly poisoned with arsenic. It's just sort of where my mind went there. Somebody chronically ill who normally is very healthy, they find arsenic in the home. If you watch Forensic Files, this is how spouses murder the other one, easily undetected unless they specifically look in the hair for arsenic. They can even tell when the poisoning began based on in the strands of hair, how far down that arsenic, where it starts. Very, very crazy. He did say he was trying to see if he could order arsenic from Mexico afterwards to use as a suicide pill, but he was afraid he would get caught. Investigators also told him that that she had told family they were coming to Connecticut for Christmas, and Anthony said they never said they were coming for Christmas. Now, when they were talking about her being chronically ill, he couldn't give specifics about who Megan saw for her illness, and he almost made it sound like she didn't really see anybody in Florida for it, but more in Connecticut. He said at one point she even miscarried, and she didn't see a doctor but saw a midwife, even though she was hemorrhaging. Most women, when you miscarry, you have to go to the hospital and have a D&C done to remove the remnants of that pregnancy, or you can get really sick and die from infection. Here's the very disturbing part. He said that they burned the body of the miscarried baby and buried it in, I believe he said, a paint can on the property. They asked what he's most upset about, and he said he's here and not with his family. The investigator said he's been in constant contact with Anthony's family, and the investigator says there's some things he doesn't believe. He said, if you had a method of suicide planned, then why the confusion of who went after the kids and all these failed attempts on your part to kill yourself? And I thought it was a good point. investigators say the autopsy does not line up with his version of the boys being stabbed while they were alive. And we know that from the medical examiner. Tony was very adamant. I mean, just 100% argued with the investigator almost that he did stab these boys while they were alive. But the medical examiner knows what they're doing, and they can tell when this is the case and when it's not. Not sure why he would lie about that if he's supposedly telling us out of the story. The investigator again asks about how the kids died. They're trying to get him to repeat that, and there were some discrepancies in his story the second go around. He said that Tyler actually kicked the knife and it went behind the couch and he had to get it. There were some other discrepancies I didn't quite catch. I'll go back and talk about those tomorrow. Ultimately, they tell him he's going to be charged with the murders, and he says he takes full responsibility for that. So that was kind of the testimony today. It was long, very graphic, just very disturbing. Man, bless these children's hearts and Megan, just unimaginable. And, when you have a suicide pact and it's a pact and there's been homicides and one person's alive, it just throws up a lot of red flags. But I see what the defense is going to do. They're going to say you can't rule out Megan was the one holding that knife. You can't say for sure everybody died from Benadryl poisoning. So they have an opening, but ultimately it's going to be in the jury's hands, and juries can use common sense. So we will see what tomorrow brings. Hope you guys have a good evening. If you're one of our regulars on the Vallow Daybell case, we will be putting out a new episode here in a couple of hours where we continue the text messages. If you're new to us, you can go to our YouTube or podcast channels, wherever you get them on. Go look at past episodes, catch up on cases you haven't been following, and follow along with us in the future. We appreciate you guys, and we will see you soon.
Okay, round two. Name something that's not boring.
A laundry? Ooh, a book club. Computer solitaire, huh?
Ah, sorry, we were looking for Chumba Casino. That's right, ChumbaCasino.com has over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.